Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to We the People. And today I'm going to be discussing the Louisiana Purchase and also the Lewis and Clarke expedition, since they both go hand in hand with each other. As always, I'm going to ask you to please subscribe to my channel if you haven't subscribed yet. I'm still at 60 subscribers right now, trying to reach 500. And because I would like to do some live off of my phone at some of my locations I go to, but until I reach 500, I cannot do it on my phone. I have to do it on the computer. So I'd like to do a shout out to the History Channel and to the United States Archives. That's who I get my information from. And also don't forget about my Flipper channel, Rex Flippers. I just put a video out yesterday in reference to what I sold. I also talked about different things like telling people to quit bashing the eBay and quit bashing the United States Postal Service. They got a lot on their hands, and with the shortage of people wanting to work these days since the pandemic, it's kind of hard for them to do what they can with what they got. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and get started. And I'm going to start with 8 things you may not know about the Louisiana Purchase. 8 things you may not know about the Louisiana Purchase. Number 1, France had just retaken control of the Louisiana Territory. French explorer Robert Cavelier de La Salle first claimed the Louisiana Territory which he named for King Louis XIV during a 1682 canoe expedition down the Mississippi River. France ceded the land to Spain 80 years later and lost most of its North American holdings to Great Britain, following its defeat in the French and Indian War. In 1800, however, French leader Napoleon Bonaparte pressured Spain to sign the secret Treaty of San Ildefonso, under which he received the Louisiana Territory and 6 warships in exchange for placing the Spanish king's son and son-in-law on the throne of the newly created kingdom of Etruria in northern Italy. When word of the secret agreement leaked out, President Jefferson became extremely worried. French-controlled Louisiana would become a point of eternal friction with us, he wrote in April 1802, and would force us to marry ourselves to the British fleet and nation. 2, the United States nearly went to war over Louisiana. Under a 1795 treaty with Spain, U.S. merchants and farmers could send their goods down the Mississippi River and store them in New Orleans without paying export duties. For many Americans, the so-called right of deposit was important enough that the talk of war began proliferating when it was revoked in October of 1802. Former Treasury Secretary Alexander Hamilton, using the pen name Pericles, wrote that the United States should seize at once on the Floridas and New Orleans and then negotiate. Meanwhile, the governor of the Mississippi Territory claimed that 600 militiamen would be enough to grab hold of New Orleans, and Federalist Senator James Ross of Pennsylvania advocated taking possession of the city with 50,000 men. Even Jefferson's own party, the Democratic Republicans, supported a resolution that would keep 80,000 men ready to march at a moment's notice. This bravado arose largely because Napoleon's powerful army had yet to arrive in Louisiana. Several thousand troops slated for the territory were instead being decimated by a slave rebellion and yellow fever in Santo Domingo, which is now Haiti, and the additional troops were stuck in a Dutch port waiting for the winter ice to clear. Point number 3, the United States never asked for all of Louisiana. On the advice of a French friend, Jefferson offered to purchase the land from Napoleon rather than threatening war over it. He instructed his two chief negotiators, Special Envoy James Monroe and Minister Robert Livingston, to pay up to $9.375 million for New Orleans and Florida, the latter of which remained under Spanish control. If that failed, they were to try to get back the right of deposit. Livingston also floated a plan for the United States to take over two-thirds of Louisiana located north of the Arkansas River, which he argued would serve as a crucial buffer between French Louisiana and British Canada. But although the Americans never asked for it, Napoleon dangled the entire territory in front of them on April 11th, 1803. A treaty dated April 30th and signed May 2nd was then worked out that gave Louisiana to the United States in exchange for $11.25 million plus the forgiveness of $3.75 million in French debt. Point number 4. Even that low price was steep for the United States. Napoleon wanted the money immediately in order to prepare for war with Great Britain. But despite landing Louisiana for less than 3 cents an acre, the price was more than the United States could afford. As a result, it was forced to borrow from two European banks at the 6% interest. It did not finish repaying the loan until 1823, by which time the total cost for Louisiana Purchase had risen to over $23 million. Point number 5. The Louisiana negotiations helped put James Monroe in the proverbial poorhouse. After spending 3 years as governor of Virginia, Monroe purportedly hoped to retire from politics and make some money opening a law practice and developing his land holdings. Barely a month went by, however, before Jefferson nominated him as a special envoy to help Livingston with the Louisiana Purchase negotiations. Were you to refuse to go, no other man could be found who does this, Jefferson wrote to him in January 1803, adding that all eyes, all hopes are now fixed on you. In order to raise money for passage to France, a cash-strapped Monroe sold off his silver flatware, porcelain plates, and a white and gold china set. The future president, who served from 1817 to 1825, remained in debt for the rest of his life, even after receiving a $30,000 congressional appropriation for public losses and sacrifices. Point number 6. Napoleon's brothers tried to talk him out of it. A few days before Monroe arrived in Paris, Napoleon's brothers, Joseph and Lucien, found out his plans to sell off Louisiana. According to Lucien's memoirs, the two of them visited Napoleon at Tuileries Palace, where they found him bathing in rose-scented water. When Joseph intimated that he would lead the opposition to the deal, Napoleon accused him of being insolent. He then purposely soaked his brother by falling backwards in the tub. The argument allegedly continued after Joseph went home to change. Lucien declared that if I were not your brother, I would be your enemy. And Napoleon responded by smashing a snuff box on the floor. Point number 7. Many Americans likewise opposed the Louisiana Purchase. Members of the Federalist Party, already a significant minority in both houses of Congress, worried that the Louisiana Purchase would further reduce their clout. In summing up the feeling of his cohorts, former Congressman Fisher Ames wrote, "We are to give money of which we have too little for land of which we already have too much of." Only one Federalist senator supported ratification of the Louisiana Purchase Treaty, which passed by a 24-7 vote. Jefferson himself had doubts about the legality of the Louisiana Purchase, saying he had stretched the Constitution until it cracked. And the 8th point is when Meriwether Lewis and William Clarke departed, the treaty did not state specific boundaries. When Meriwether Lewis and William Clarke departed from St. Louis in May 1804 to explore the northern portion of Louisiana, the exact boundaries of the newly acquired territory had yet to be bashed out. Based on analysis of French maps, the United States claimed West Florida, an area along the Gulf Coast in present-day Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana. Spain disputed this until 1819, when the Adams-Onis Treaty gave the United States all of Florida in exchange for surrendering its claim to Texas. In the north, Great Britain and the United States agreed in 1818 to establish the 49th parallel as the border between them from the lakes and woods to the Rocky Mountains. Louisiana Purchase, the land deal of the millennium. For a mere $15 million, Thomas Jefferson doubled the size of the United States, buying 800,000 square miles from the French that stretched from the Mississippi River to the Rocky Mountains. Now we'll move on to the Lewis and Clarke expedition. The Lewis and Clarke expedition began in 1804 when President Thomas Jefferson tasked Meriwether Lewis with exploring the lands west of the Mississippi River that comprised the Louisiana Purchase. Lewis chose William Clarke as his co-leader for the mission. The excursion lasted over 2 years. Along the way, they confronted harsh weather, unforgiving terrain, treacherous waters, injuries, starvation, disease, and both friendly and hostile Native Americans. Nevertheless, the approximately 8,000-mile journey was deemed a huge success and provided new geographic, ecological, and cultural information about previously uncharted areas of North America. Who were Lewis and Clarke? Meriwether Lewis was born in Virginia in 1774, but spent his early childhood in Georgia. He returned to Virginia as a teenager to receive his education and graduated from college in 1793. He then joined the Virginia State Militia, where he helped to put down the Whiskey Rebellion, and later became a captain in the U.S. Army. At age 27, he became personal secretary to President Thomas Jefferson. William Clarke was born in Virginia in 1770, but moved with his family to Kentucky at the age of 15. At age 19, he joined the state militia and then the regular army, where he served with Lewis and was eventually commissioned by President George Washington as a lieutenant of the infantry. In 1796, Clarke returned home to manage his family estates, and 7 years later, Lewis chose him to embark on the epic excursion that would help shape America's history. Louisiana Purchase. During the French and Indian War, France surrendered a large part of Louisiana to Spain, and almost all of it remaining lands to Great Britain. Initially, Spain's acquisition didn't have a major impact, since it still allowed the United States to travel the Mississippi River and use New Orleans as a trade port. Then Napoleon Bonaparte took power in France in 1799 and wanted to regain France's former territory in the United States. In 1802, King Charles IV of Spain returned this Louisiana territory to France and revoked America's port access. In 1803, under the threat of war, President Jefferson and James Monroe successfully negotiated a deal with France to purchase the Louisiana territory, which included 827,000 square miles for $15 million. Even before negotiations with France were finished, Jefferson asked Congress to finance an expedition to survey the lands of the so-called Louisiana Purchase and appointed Lewis as expedition commander. Preparation for the Lewis and Clarke expedition. Preparations immediately. He studied medicine, botany, astronomy, and zoology, and scrutinized existing maps and journals of the region. He also asked his friend Clarke to command the expedition. Even though Clarke was once Lewis's superior, Lewis was technically in charge of the trip. But for all intents and purposes, the two shared equal responsibility. On July 5, 1803, Lewis visited the arsenal at Harper's Ferry to obtain munitions. He then rowed a custom-made 55-foot keel boat, also called the boat or the barge, down the Ohio River and joined Clarke in Clarksville, Indiana. From there, Clarke took the boat up the Mississippi River, while Lewis continued along on horseback to collect additional supplies. Some of the supplies collected were surveying instruments, including compasses, quadrants, telescopes, sextants, and a chronometer, Also included camping supplies, including oilcloth, steel flints, tools, utensils, cornmeal, mosquito netting, fishing equipment, soap and salt, clothing, weapons and ammunition, medicines, and medical supplies, books on botany, geography, and astronomy maps. Lewis also collected gifts to present to Native Americans along the journey, such as beads, face paint, knives, tobacco, ivory combs, bright colored cloths, sewing notions, and mirrors. The Corps of Discovery. Lewis entrusted Clarke to recruit men for their Corps of Volunteers for Northwest Discovery, or simply the Corps of Discovery. Throughout the winter of 1803 and 1804, Clarke recruited and trained men at Camp Du Bois, north of St. Louis, Missouri. He chose unmarried, healthy men who were good hunters and knew survival skills. The expedition's party included 45 souls, including Lewis, Clarke, 27 unmarried soldiers, a French Indian interpreter, a contracted boat crew, and an enslaved person owned by Clarke named York. On May 14, 1804, Clarke and the Corps joined Lewis in St. Louis, Missouri, and headed upstream on the Missouri River in the keelboat and two smaller boats at a rate of about 15 miles per day. Heat, swarms of insects, and strong river currents made the trip arduous at best. To maintain discipline, Lewis and Clarke ruled the Corps with an iron hand and doled out harsh punishments such as bareback lashings and hard labor for those who got out of line. On August 20 of that year, 22-year-old Corps member Sergeant Charles Floyd died of an abdominal infection, possibly appendicitis. He was the only member of the Corps to die on their journey. Native American encounters. Most of the land Lewis and Clarke surveyed was already occupied by Native Americans. In fact, the Corps encountered around 50 different Native American tribes, including the Shoshone, the Mandan, the Minotari, the Blackfeet, the Chinook, and the Sioux. Lewis and Clarke developed a first contact protocol for meeting new tribes. They bartered goods and presented the tribe's leader with a Jefferson Indian peace medal, a coin engraved with the image of Thomas Jefferson on one side, and image of two hands clasped beneath a tomahawk and a peace pipe with the inscription, "Peace and Friendship," on the other. They also told the Indians that Americans owned their land and offered military protection in exchange for peace. Some Indians had met white men before and were friendly and open to trade. Others were wary of Lewis and Clarke and their intentions and were openly hostile, though seldom violent. In August, Lewis and Clarke held peaceful Indian councils with the Odu near present-day Council Bluff, Iowa, and the Yankton Sioux at present-day Yankton, South Dakota. In late September, however, they encountered the Teton Sioux, who weren't as accommodating and tried to stop the Corps boats and demanded a toll payment, but they were no match for the military weapons of the Corps and soon moved on. Fort Mandan. In early November, the Corps came across villages of friendly Mandan and Minotari Indians near present-day Washburn, North Dakota, and decided to set up camp downriver for the winter along the banks of the Missouri River. Within about 4 weeks, they built a triangle-shaped fort called Fort Mandan, which was surrounded by 16-foot pickets and contained quarters and storage rooms. The Corps spent the next 5 months at Fort Mandan hunting, foraging, and making canoes, ropes, leather clothing, and moccasins, while Clarke prepared new maps. According to Clarke's journal, the men were in good health overall, other than those suffering from sexually transmitted infections. Sacagaway. While at Fort Mandan, Lewis and Clarke met French-Canadian trapper Toussaint Charbonneau and hired him as an interpreter. They allowed his pregnant Shoshone wife, Sacagaway, to join him on the expedition. Sacagaway had been kidnapped by Hidatsa Indians at age 12 and then sold to Charbonneau. Lewis and Clarke hoped she could help them communicate with the Shoshone and that they encountered on their journey. On February 11th, 1805, Chicago gave birth to a son and named him Jean Baptiste. She became an invaluable and respected asset for Lewis and Clarke. The Continental Divide. On April 7th, 1805, Lewis and Clarke sent some of their crew and their keelboats loaded with zoological, botanical samplings, maps, reports, and letters back to St. Louis, while they and the rest of the Corps headed for the Pacific Ocean. They crossed through Montana and made their way to the Continental Divide via Lemhi Pass, where, with Chicago's help, they purchased horses from the Shoshone. While there, Chicago reunited with her brother Camaway, who hadn't seen her since she was kidnapped. The group next headed out to Lemhi Pass and crossed the Bitterroot mountain range using the harrowing Lolo Trail and the help of many horses and a handful of Shoshone guides. This leg of the journey proved to be the most difficult. Many of the party suffered from frostbite, hunger, dehydration, bad weather, freezing temperatures, and exhaustion. Still, despite the merciless terrain and conditions, not a single soul was lost. After 11 days on the Lolo Trail, the Corps stumbled upon a tribe of friendly Nez Perce Indians along Idaho's Clearwater River. The Indians took in the weary travelers, fed them, and helped them regain their health. As the Corps recovered, they built dugout canoes, then left their horses with the Nez Perce and braved the Clearwater River rapids to Snake River and then to the Columbia River. They reportedly ate dog meat along the way instead of game. Fort Clatsop. A bedraggled and harried Corps finally reached the stormy Pacific Ocean in November of 1805. They completed their mission and had to find a place to live for the winter before heading home. They decided to make camp near present-day Astoria, Oregon, and started building Fort Clatsop on December 10th and moved in by Christmas. It was not an easy winter at Fort Clatsop. Everyone struggled to keep themselves and their supplies dry and fought an ongoing battle with tormenting fleas and other insects. Almost everyone was weak and sick with stomach problems, likely caused by bacterial infection, hunger, and influenza-like symptoms. Lewis and Clarke's journey home. On March 23, 1806, the Corps left Fort Clatsop for home. They retrieved their horses from the Nez Perce and waited until June for the snow to melt to cross the mountains into the Missouri River Basin. After again traversing the rugged Bitterroot mountain range, Lewis and Clarke split up at Lola Pass. Lewis' group took a shortcut north to the Great Falls of the Missouri River and explored Marias River, a tributary of the Missouri in present-day Montana, while Clarke's group, including Chicago and her family, went south along the Yellowstone River. The two groups planned to rendezvous where the Yellowstone and Missouri met in North Dakota. Pompey's Pillar. On July 25, 1806, Clarke carved his name and the date on a large rock formation near the Yellowstone River he named Pompey's Pillar, after Chicago's son, whose nickname was Pompey. The site is now a national monument managed by the U.S. Department of the Interior. 2 days later, at the Marias River near present-day Cut Bank, Montana, Lewis and his group encountered 8 Blackfoot warriors and were forced to kill 2 of them when they tried to steal weapons and horses. The location of the clash became known as Two Medicine Fight Site. It was the only violent episode of the expedition, although soon after the Blackfeet fight, Lewis was accidentally shot in his buttocks during a hunting trip. The injury was painful and inconvenient, but not fatal. On August 12, 1806, Lewis and Clarke and their crews reunited and dropped off Chicago and her family at the Mandan village. They then headed down the Missouri River, with the currents moving in their favor this time, and arrived in St. Louis on September 23rd, where they were received with a hero's welcome. Legacy of the expedition. Lewis and Clarke returned to Washington, D.C. in the fall of 1806 and shared their experiences with President Jefferson. While they had failed to identify a coveted Northwest Passage water route across the continent, they had completed their mission of surveying the Louisiana Territory from the Mississippi River to the Pacific Ocean and did so against tremendous odds with just one death and little violence. The Corps had traveled more than 8,000 miles, produced invaluable maps and geographical information, identified at least 120 animal specimens and 200 botanical samples, and initiated peaceful relations with dozens of Native American tribes. Both Lewis and Clarke received double pay and 1,600 acres of land for their efforts. Lewis was made governor of the Louisiana Territory, and Clarke was appointed Brigadier General of Militia for Louisiana Territory and a federal Indian agent. Clarke remained well respected and lived a successful life. Lewis, however, was not an effective governor and drank too much. He never married or had children and died in 1809 of 2 gunshot wounds, possibly self-inflicted. A few years later, Sacagaway died, and Clarke became her children's guardian. Despite Lewis's tragic end, his expedition with Clarke remains one of America's most famous. The duo and their crew, with the aid of Sacagaway and other Native Americans, helped strengthen the American claims to the West and inspired countless other explorers and Western pioneers. So that's what I have on the Lewis and Clarke expedition. And like I say, I get my information from U.S. Archives and from the History Channel. That's www.historychannel.com. And my next video will be coming out here shortly. I haven't chose the document what I will be doing exactly yet. It may be the next president that I need to cover. So without further ado, again, I'm going to ask that you please subscribe to my channel, hit that like button, and tell all your friends and neighbors about this channel, and spread the word, because I need more subscribers. I've only got 60 right now, looking for 500. So without further ado, from my family to yours, have a good day, and God bless America.